Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 5, Feel Her Love. My name is Grace Leeder, but of course I'm not alone. I'm stuck in this spores-infected hospital. It's Taran. Taran, how you doing?
Take my gas mask, Grace. I'm immune.
That's good. You're immune. That's
Yeah,
good. Yeah.
I am her.
Feel her
Feel her
love.
love.
That's right. All right. So actually, this is kind of as I was not on the immediate recap episode. Jess Sterling delightfully filled in for me to chat about the episode with Mike Bloom. And I actually haven't had a chance to listen to it yet. It was a very busy weekend and busy evening for me. Mother's Day weekend, lots of traveling I did, so a little busy catching up on work this morning. So yeah, I don't know what anybody thinks about this episode. I just have my thoughts, and I'll chat with them with you, Taran. But I'll cede the floor to you first in terms of what you thought of season 2, episode 5.
Well, I do want to just make sure we set the stage here. Of
Oh
course,
yeah.
this is the deep dive podcast. We will be spoiling the episode, talking about it in the context of the game, but not spoiling anything from the game or any future events in the first portion of the podcast. And then at the end, we will go into a spoiler section where we talk more in depth and in detail about spoilery specific things. But there's still a lot, and quite frankly, most of what we talk about is spoiler free. I really liked the episode. I thought it was really good. I think it started really strong with the spores. I think that we led into another just very intense action set piece, followed by some intense, gory murders, and then leading into more intense spore-filled basements and revenge torture stuff. So yeah, big episode, and Jesse's back.
Yeah, Jesse's back. Yeah, I agree. I think it's very clear so far from the season. I think this is basically the third episode in a row that it's like, this is the story. This is what we're telling you. It's about Ellie and it's about Dena and it's whoever is here in Seattle, which I think is good. I mean, I think that probably tracks with season 1. I feel like we didn't really explore other things unless it was a flashback at the beginning of the episode, which only was like the first few, or it was something where, like, if they were in Kansas City, then we got the brothers, or we got like the leader of that group. Like, we got these other scenes, but only ever in the context of like where Ellie and Joel were. And so I think in terms of like I find this season to be very narrowly focused, which is not a complaint. I think it's actually a good thing. So yeah, I think it's just an interesting observation for me. I think there's enough going on this episode, and you just said this before we started, and I can't remember last week where we talked about it in the thing, but there has been sort of this like critique of the show this season of like, shouldn't Ellie be like way more mad about the fact that Joel died, and shouldn't she just be like angry and like not joking around and goofing off with Dena? And I think, I don't know where I said it, but I think my thing was like, let's wait until she sees somebody that she has involved with that thing. And I have to say, I feel like I'm pretty right in terms of like, yeah, now we saw it. Now it's real. Ellie's, tortured Nora in the basement of this or this floor of the basement of the hospital. It's pretty she's pretty angry, Taran. Ellie's pretty angry.
Pretty angry. Yeah, this episode I think cleared some things up to me in terms of the way that I've been viewing it. I think the complaint about Ellie being too chipper or like not, sour enough, is seemingly like the main one that seems to be floating around. It's not one that I honestly think I even would have thought about at all if I hadn't seen it. But because I'd seen it, I'd been thinking about it. And it is a change. It is a change from the game. But I think this episode has made it clear to me that this was not only an intentional change and one that isn't intended to remove the anger that Ellie clearly has, but one that was in favor of a structure that they're building up to. Like, this whole season has been a build to this reveal in episode 5, the reveal that Ellie knew about what Joel did at the end of season 1. And that is all, like, it's all building to that moment. Episode 1 set this up when Abby represented the danger of, like, the truth coming out. Joel's entire arc in the 2 episodes that he was in was about his inability to confess. And we've had this image of Ellie being Ellie being innocent of like what he did, his crime. And that was sort of like reinforced by, I think, this decision to have Ellie compartmentalize so much during this journey through Seattle. But we were told in episode 3, Ellie is a liar. Some people can't be saved. But we don't like believe the therapist when she says that. Like, we're like, oh yeah, come on, but it's Ellie. Like, come on. Even though she was kind of presented as having like true knowledge, we were kind of like, but it's Ellie. Like, yeah, she lied to you. She doesn't lie to us. You know what I mean? And this episode, I think, was just clearly a culmination of all of that. Like, this is the first time that Ellie has been separate from Dena since she broke down in Joel's closet. It's the first time she's truly been alone since Joel's death at all. And now we are kind of seeing not necessarily like the real her, but like the mask come off. And we are seeing the version of Ellie that Abby helped create. And this, I think, is the twist of the entire season. Like, this is the reveal that the entire structure hinges on. And it seems to be all building toward a flashback episode next week that it seems like we're going to get, that is going to sort of like dive into this reveal. That I think it's very interesting how they've sort of set this up.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think I think just in terms of like what I thought of the episode, this all works for me. I think and we'll talk about some of the ways in which, like, it is kind of like Dena expressing this, like, little bit, after the sort of pregnancy reveal last week, and they have this conversation, and where basically Dena's gonna, like, basically be like, no, like, we're gonna go get revenge, we're gonna go do this. Tied together with this piece where Ellie's gonna she's gonna meet one of them in Nora, and yeah, the reveal that she knows what Joel did, I think, is it really did work for me as sort of an episode cliffhanger thing that we had sort of been like waiting for a little bit, I think, as video game uh viewers, and yeah, I think sets up presumably an episode that has Pedro Pascal in it next week.
Yeah, and I think it's good to point out the Dena's part here, because I think that, like, they've also clearly made efforts to tie this into the themes of season 1. Even like they've tied it into the plot of season 1 in that, like, she knows. And so this is, I think, more concretely linked to the events of season 1 than the game sometimes was, especially in the early parts of it. But we're also connecting to themes. Dena talking about her backstory. She explains that when she was a kid, she went out with her gun and then came back to a raider killing her mom and sister. And she murdered that raider. And we've basically heard 2 things about Dena's mom. We've heard that she was, like, a bit homophobic, but in a way that was sort of expressing her love.
Yeah.
And now we're hearing, Dena murdered for the sake of her mother, right? Like,
Right.
this is Dena's, like, purest expression of love,
Yeah.
like in what we have seen from her, what we have heard from her. A willingness to deliver revenge at any cost is how she seems to understand what love is, and that's why being on this path with Ellie seems to be so important to her. Like, no, I am going to be with you on this because this is love. And so, now we've discovered that Ellie has also come around to accepting Joel's decision, Joel's version of love. Like, embracing that kind of love is is something that like is meaningful to her, but it's also so dangerous. That was the entire point of the theme of season 1. Like
Yep.
it can lead you down a path that can put you and the people that you love in danger. And we see that in this episode, that like she's conflicted. Like on one hand, I loved Joel and I love Joel and I need to get revenge for what happened to him. That is how I express that love. But on the other hand, I also love Dena. And what I'm doing, she's pregnant. I'm putting her in danger, and she gets shot by an arrow in this episode.
Yeah.
And she says, "Hey, I'll meet you back at the theater." But when she is confronted with, oh, the hospital, a destination of mine for revenge, she chooses the hospital over the theater. And this is like an interesting new angle to this love is dangerous theme, where we're seeing kind of like different versions of it, different versions of love, different versions of how it can be beautiful and dangerous at the same time. And I think that this was such a cool kind of culmination of these things in a way that bridged the gap even more between season 1 and season 2 for me.
Yeah, I think this is a thing that I like to give the show, like, I think this is a really great show. And I do think in terms of like what's working for it, it's already, I think the video game version is, and you can talk about whether the first game and the second game, if they work equally for people, they don't for most people. But what this was is it's a really strong story that you also at times get to run around and shoot zombies. But I feel like the changes they've made to the show, where they have made changes, to me, the reason I think that they're working is that I feel like, Druckmann and Mason so fundamentally understand what the story is about and the theme of this story, and like exactly what you're highlighting. And I feel like so often things that get, and it's very rare, I think, to get a thing that's an adaptation that is so like, we are just telling you the same story that was in the video game, like, like at times shot for shot, but when they do make changes, you feel like the changes don't make sense for the themes of the story. And I think this just does. I think that they have such a clear understanding of what they're trying to say in the story, where when they make pivots to things that are maybe different in the show now than the video game, it comes from like such a strong central core, that it tends to work more often than it doesn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it's just really hard to watch something when you have a comparison and you're just looking at the differences and you're trying to understand why the differences exist, because it can especially if you're attached to the original way that it went. But I think that from what I've seen, it seems like the gulf between people who have played the game and haven't played the game in terms of the discussion around this show has been like widening significantly over the course of this season. Where I'm seeing like threads of people who are like show only people discussing the show and talking about loving it, and then people who have played the game coming into those threads and arguing with those people, being like, no, you don't understand that this thing isn't as meaningful to you as it's supposed to be. So you're not actually enjoying this as much as you should be.
Right.
And it's like, it's just so strange. And I think there's a lot more to get into with that later on. But in terms of the episode itself, I thought this was great. I thought that it really landed on so many different levels. And having this kind of reveal that she knew, followed up by an explanation, I imagine, in the next episode as to how that happened. At the same time that we're introducing these new and dangerous parts of, again, it's not lost on me that yes, there's a practical reason for introducing spores here, but thematically, it also makes so much sense in the same way that I thought the attack on Jackson did, where like the same episode that we're learning that Ellie knew that Joel murdered all of those people and essentially potentially doomed humanity, we are also introduced to a new, more deadly, more dangerous version of the cordyceps, these spores that are airborne. It's so terrifying that they sealed this place off, because could you imagine if this became airborne across the world? And we're also reminded of the new evolution of the infected themselves, the stalkers, who show up in great number here and would have absolutely destroyed both her and Dena. And so we are again being constantly reminded of the potential impact of Joel's decision and the ways in which that this thing keeps evolving and becoming even more dangerous.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, that's where we start the episode, is with we get this the information reveal of this hospital that needed to be cleared out, and it was going fine basically until they get to level B2, I believe, or B3, can't remember exactly which one, where B2, where there are the spores. And so, yeah, I think probably if you've listened to a bunch of our deep dives from season 1 or now in season 2, at some point along the way, we've talked about the idea that there are no spores in this world. That is a sort of a thing that is there in the video game in part 1 and part 2, where these moments where you end into some, like, normally like an underground, like a subway system, like a, a subway tunnel or a basement or something like that, or just these different areas, and immediately your characters like put on masks. Ellie doesn't necessarily need to wear a mask. She does sometimes if there are other people who she doesn't want to know that she is infected or that she's immune to being infected. And it was sort of like a thing that got removed from the show, that it seemed like, I don't know if this is true or not, but the main decision to do it seemed to be around the idea that we were not that far removed, and still are not that far removed, from an airborne virus that was circulating the world. And it was kind of just like, maybe we don't have to do this. And there were other ways to sort of like get around almost everything that happened. I think that, like, certainly the idea by this point that, like, we could introduce the spores does make sense. I think that I was thinking kind of like, I guess I don't really know why you would do it now if you haven't done it so far, but your point of it being like, look at the way, I think, yeah, it's very noted that like there are multiple things where they've been like, this thing is getting scarier. It's evolving. It's getting better. And that plays into this idea of like what Joel potentially cost humanity by saving Ellie, I think is a really good point. But what'd you make of this, like, this sort of opening scenes here with the reveal of the spores?
I thought this was great.
Yeah.
I thought this was so well done. We talked a little bit about the actor playing this WLF leader figure, and quite honestly, I think that, like, probably the reason she is here is for this scene, because the fear in her eyes when this soldier says, like, oh, they said it's in the air, was just phenomenal. You can just see how terrifying this is. And then we also there's two major things I think about this scene, that beyond just the initial experience of it, which was great by itself. But this soldier, she needs to lock her troops, her fellow soldiers, in B2. They say, seal us in. She seals them in. It's clearly a difficult decision. It's a hard choice to make. And on the way out, the other leader of the WLF woman says, I'm sorry for your loss of your son. And it's like, oh, that's brutal. And very clearly, and they mentioned this in the podcast, like, this is a parallel to Joel's decision. That essentially in a similar kind of spot, Ellie, he knew, would have wanted at the time to very likely would have chosen to sacrifice herself for the sake of humanity. And he said no. He chose to stop that from happening. And in this spot, this woman's son said, seal us in. It is the better call. Now you could say that, like, he might have already been infected at that point. He was already dead. But she doesn't know that for sure. She just knows that this is the decision that he's making, and I'm going to trust him, and I'm going to doom him to death. And if Joel had been in that position, I don't think he makes that same decision. I think he busts in there and he makes sure that all hope is lost before he gives up on it. And I think that's so interesting, especially when contrasted with the fact that through Ellie and her quest for revenge, the seal to this area is broken. And who knows what might occur from that. More people get infected, as we saw in the episode, but like, now what are these spores going to escape? Where is it going to go from here? And how much, is Ellie responsible for some of that, in a way that again mirrors Joel saving her in the first place? So just great stuff there.
Yeah,
And
really
then
good.
just
In a hospital,
small,
it's great. Yeah, it's
yeah,
really smart.
small second thing as well. Craig Mazin wrote this episode. Definitely Chernobyl vibes from the like, oh, here's
Yeah,
this big disaster. Let's just seal it away and pretend it doesn't exist, and don't tell anyone, and just hope it's fine.
that's good. Yeah, yeah, it'll be fine. It'll be fine. No worries. No worries. Just don't tell anybody about it. Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, I love I mean, this scene is works exceptionally well. The thing about it being her son, in a hospital making the decision that basically like Joel doesn't make is like, yeah, it's very good. Mirroring here. All right, Ellie's gonna go off and search around the theater. We get another musical moment, back to back episodes. This one's from the video game as well, where she's gonna sing "Future Days." I like these. I'm sure people will just like it. I don't know that we needed like, I don't know. I guess like 2 episodes of the you know s-
Yeah. In
singing.
the
It's
build
kind yeah.
in the build up to it, I was like, are we really about to do this again? And then it stops immediately, and I was like, okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I get it. Like, the idea is showing this is a hint, another hint, because apparently a lot of people do not get these hints, that everything on the surface with Ellie is not quite the whole story. That she is unable to even start this song, basically, before she is like just attacked, from all of the things that she's trying to hold down. And so I thought that was great, but I do agree that like there was a period of like 30 seconds where I was
Yeah.
like a little bit taken aback, a little bit thrown out of the episode, because I was like, are we doing another one?
Yeah. Um, we get them heading across. They're gonna head through across town, journey across the city. They're gonna see these like "Feel Her Love" murals. This is where Dita's gonna give the story of how she killed the person who had killed her mom. And yeah, they're gonna head across town. Yeah.
Yes, through the triangulation with the triangles, and we also learn a bit via theory, at least, from Dena, that the WLF, they're talking openly on the radios as though they know nobody's listening, and she says that maybe the Seraphites are like the Amish in that they don't use advanced technology. They're shooting people with bows and arrows. Maybe that is part of their sort of belief system. And given everything we've seen so far, that feels like a pretty good theory.
Right. Um, so then we're gonna get we get more of the stalkers, I think is good. I think they've set them up well enough at the beginning of the season to then have them return here, where they're gonna like have to fight them off and eventually be saved by Jesse, who reveals that him and Tommy snuck out of Jackson the night after Ellie and Dena left. Yeah.
Another just like terrifying scenario that builds,
Yep.
where it's like, all right, there's one. The last time I fought one, it did bite me, but it's 2-on-1 now. Like, here's the plan. I'll distract, or like one of us will distract the other. Well, oh, there's more than one. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Let's just let's maybe think about moving. Oh, there's some over there too. Oh, there's a bunch. Oh, we're dead actually. Please hide in the cage while I die.
There's so many times, specifically stalkers, I feel like, where like I was playing the video game and just like died so many times because you just can't see them, they're very
Mhm.
annoying. They're the most annoying. uh yeah, they're very annoying.
And you just feel that, like, I feel like I don't often watch shows or movies where I feel a sense of helplessness for the characters, because you always feel like, oh, well, they'll get out of it. And I've played the game. I know they're going to get out of this situation. Even if I hadn't played the game, I probably know that they're getting out of this situation. But this show has done a really good job at an effective job at like making me feel like they're screwed. Like there's no way out of this. I don't know how they could possibly get out of this.
You know, I think there's something to the fact that like in the game, you can I think I said this like last week. I was talking about this last week in terms of like the differences between Ellie from the game and Ellie in the show, and like just how many more people and infected Ellie as a character you kill in the video game. Like you're like part of the game is to get to kill zombies, so you're like constantly doing it, and so you're a little bit like desensitized to it. And I do think to some degree then like you have this level of like this is how capable like you're, and like the idea that like oftentimes you're like crouching and you sneak up and then you like press the circle button or whatever and you like shank affected. Like in the video game, like you get, I don't know, it's like an animated video game. So there's a little bit of like detachment to it. When you think about how disgusting and gross that would actually be to do that in real life, like just seeing it on camera is just, it's really effective. I guess I have to say that I do think this is one of the first episodes I've thought this season. I complimented them a few episodes ago. I did think it was a touch too dark for me. I was having a tough time seeing it, but for the most part, I do think it's just like the makeup work, the like the setting, all of this stuff is like I think adding where like it is like the video game where it's like, hey, you got to crouch behind that box, but you're like, but that box is actually really tiny and it'd be really hard to hide behind, you know? So anyway, I also agree that I do have this feeling of like, oh, it does legit seem scary in a way that just, I have to say, unless it was like an actual jump scare, I don't actually find myself that scared in the video game. So I'm like extra impressed, I think, for the way the TV show has handled all this.
Yeah. Yeah, good stuff there. And they are saved by Jesse. They also talked about this in I think the after show and the podcast, that, Jesse shows up and for a moment you're supposed to feel like, as Ellie does, like, oh, like, well, you're supposed to feel like, but Ellie feels like this was Joel. This was like the kind of way that Joel would show up and save her all the time in the show and the game. And there's like even a moment where he like holds out his hand in the same way that Joel did to Abby earlier in the season, to pull her up. And I think that this is kind of like step one of reintroducing more Joel to the show again. That like, hey, remember how nice it was when Joel would show up and save us?
Right. Mm-hmm. So yeah, as we said, Jesse and Tommy left the night before. They have split up. They're going to rendezvous again in the morning. But they are quickly going, the three of them are going to quickly find some Seraphites who, yeah, are, as you do, hanging and disemboweling a wolf. So pretty gnarly scene, I have to say.
They're freeing him.
They're freeing.
Grace.
That's right. It's a gift. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah. This is disgusting. It's very good horror effects work from the whichever special effects. I don't know who does this work, but very good whoever did it.
So yeah, like earlier in the season, there was discussion about the way that the Seraphites were introduced to us, and I think I think that most of that was probably in spoiler sections. We can kind of now talk about it a little more openly, in that like there were some people who played the game that were kind of like, oh man, the Seraphites were introduced to us as these kind of like harmless culty people that get massacred. But my experience of them in the game is like the scary whistling and
I think you get shot. I think the first time you meet, I think you just get like you get shot with an arrow like out of nowhere, and you're like, what the heck? I died like many times trying to just like, you have to like run away and heal yourself, and it's like, this is so annoying, and they're evil.
Yeah, so they're pretty scary. They're pretty scary people. We saw some of their handiwork in the previous episode. Now we're seeing them do it in person. And it's I continue to like the decision to introduce them as humans first and sort of monsters later, because I think that there's sort of there's a way that I think that complements the themes of this story, and I think it all ties into the way that the whole show has been operating versus how the game did it. But man, this was scary. Dena gets shot, and they split up, and Ellie says, "Meet me at the theater," but that's not where she's going.
I wonder how conscious this is. This is interesting in terms of like we talked. There's a Seraphite introduction. Also, technically, our introduction to the WLF, although it's like you can certainly say that's not the most empathetic. Like you might not empathize with Abby, but the first thing she's doing is she's at the cross where her father has been buried, and it's all of them like mourning that. And I wonder whether there's something to this theme of like the way in which the world that we currently live in, the way in which you get like hardened by it, like you get like it is brutal. Like there is at the base of everybody you meet, there is a humanity to them. And essentially, like the more you know somebody, the more you end up seeing these. For the most part, I'm just like trying to think whether this is my thesis statement here is true or not. Is that the more you meet someone to a degree, the more you realize that like they have been, that they are hardened by this world. They have to do things. They make these choices that you would not do in any other scenario other than we're in the post-apocalyptic, United States. I think that's kind of like a really interesting philosophy that I wonder whether we might see, whether we can track that across. Because again, even like the first time we meet Abby, like yeah, she says she's gonna kill Joel, but also like she's doing it while she's like mourning the death of her father. Like immediately after the death of her father. This is like then we jump forward 5 years.
I I find it really interesting to play around with the ways that we empathize
Yeah,
as an audience, and as people.
yeah,
And obviously, there is something to the idea of introducing something as a monster and then revealing it's that there's humanity to it, and challenging you to empathize with that. Yeah, that exists. But I also think that there's a lot of, and this is what I think the show is doing right now, a lot of value to introducing something or someone as human and then hardening yourself to that. Seeing the Seraphites at first and feeling empathy with them and feeling like, oh wow, this little girl just got murdered, and then seeing this disembowelment, and hey, here's another like young woman who is chasing Ellie, in the woods, in the park, and do I look at them the same way? Am I going to start feeling like they're scars and like maybe some of them do deserve to die? Like like how do I feel as more and more information is revealed to me, as more of their crimes are revealed to me? And can I lose that empathy that I had with them initially? I think is a really interesting kind of thing. In the same way that, like, yeah, we're maybe introduced to Abby very early on as like maybe, and I think it was a pretty brief moment, but like maybe a slightly sympathetic figure. But then she's like, I'm gonna make it slow, and I'm like, actually, you kind of suck, don't you?
yeah.
And so playing around with that, turning it off and on, I think is something that the show is probably pretty interested in, and I have found it really fascinating the way that they have decided to order things in the show so far.
If you ever want to be deeply frustrated by the ways in which like people don't understand, like people have a hard time understanding like morality of other people, is try being a dungeon master in D&D, where you try to set up interesting people, and basically like your players will go up and they'll be like, to a random stranger, and they're like, that person needs to give me 25 gold pieces, and they're like, no, I need it for my family. They're like, you're not helping us with the adventure, so you're a bad guy and you're an evil villain now. Like it's like I do think it's like I love this, like, because I'm building a new D&D campaign right now where I'm like trying to figure all that with like how do you introduce to people, and whether you sympathize or are like confrontational with them, and how you can try to change that to like tell an interesting story. And I really do think that like what's so interesting to me is like I do feel like The Last of Us is so like it is like a commentary on how we, I mean, I keep going back to this thing. It's a commentary on how we view people, which is this thing of heroes and villains are only determined by where you're standing at a particular moment. I keep going back to that idea, and I think it's like a really interesting and compelling idea. So yeah, Dena will get hit with the arrow. They're going to go back to theater. They're Ellie says she'll offer a distraction and meet them back there, but she ultimately decides not to when she gets when she notices the hospital. And I think this is again, this is like, I think not that this episode is any sort of like Breaking Bad, type thing for Ellie, but I think there is this little bit of like, that exact piece you're talking about the clues that have been there in terms of like not everything is all as it seems. This relentless pursuit of revenge. Well, the woman who is pregnant and Ellie offered to be the, a father of the baby, is, instead of going back to the theater, gonna head straight for the hospital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that something else that is probably easy to miss, especially if you're not reading it charitably, is that when Ellie is saying like, "Hey, Dena, should we be doing this? I should take you back." It is, I think, very deliberately set up this way. I should take you back.
Yeah.
This is not Ellie saying, "I'm going to stop for your sake." This is Ellie saying, "I need to put you away somewhere so that I can be freed up to go and do this." And when Jesse shows up and Dena gets hurt, the first thing Ellie does is she goes off without Dena. And I don't think that that is something you're supposed to miss. Like, it's very, I think, clearly in the text there.
To me, it's very,
Yeah.
there's a lot of Joel codedness to Ellie. I mean, we talked about this in the way in which like there's a lot of like, Tommy being introduced as like a father. I feel like there's like, you're supposed to, I think, start to like see, so I think this idea of like mirroring of people, or like how people can be the same in different situations, and this idea that like what Ellie was so mad at Joel for doing for so long was the fact that he didn't give her agency or control. And it's interesting to talk about this thing where Ellie almost is like, yeah, I don't want Dena to come and I'm going to go do this thing. It is the same sort of like burden that Joel would put on himself of like being the one who would do these things. And the choice to leave Dena behind comes in the same episode where Dena basically is like, no, we should get revenge. Like we should do this, yeah.
Yeah. And then we get the confrontation.
What'd you make of this
After
sort of like chase scene, through the hospital? I've had a tough time with like, but it's like, I feel like I can't really complain about because it's always going to be a thing, but the like being shot at, but like, I feel like, wow, these guards, it really should have got a shot off on Ellie. It's really bad.
Well,
Obviously,
great. It was so dark they couldn't see.
that's true. It was very dark. It was very dark. I liked the
Um,
jumping on the elevator. I liked that, but
mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, I also had that moment of like, okay, we're stormtrooper aiming here. Like how often is this gonna work? I feel like we didn't need to have, especially because I think it was especially egregious because they were like on higher ground looking down.
Yeah, that's
And it was just like a running target. And listen, I'm not a gun person. I don't know how easy it is to hit a moving target when you're above them, but I feel like it's easier than when you're chasing behind them. And so it felt a little worse to me that they were missing, and also that Ellie seemed mostly unconcerned about the fact
yeah,
that
I
we're
know.
maybe going to shoot.
Okay.
Which can I say remains to be an issue of mine, that they are just like walking down the middle of the street everywhere,
Yeah.
and not just like being a little more cautious in general. It's a small complaint, but it does wrinkle every time me when I'm watching that stuff.
So in the video game, because spores are already a thing, and they have to make some adjustment here to like make this work, because it's going to be the first time that basically Ellie is going to be aware of spores. In the video game, there's lots to talk about how this scene is actually a fair bit darker in the video game than it was in the television show. And one of the things that people point to is that Ellie Ellie basically, because she's like pinned down, like she's that has no way out. This is kind of like actually her escape route is to like bring Nora into the spores and know that Nora will die from the spores, and knowing that she's immune. They have to like change things up a bit where like Nora has to make an active choice to like jump to B2, and Ellie will follow her. I think there's enough in this episode that I don't know that like it's totally fine that like, and I think it's, again, we talked about this last week where I thought maybe by the a lot of people thought by last week, because so we, I don't know if we talked about it in this section, we talked about it in the last section, the scene where Dena finds out that Ellie is immune is in spores. And I talked about how like it just would not have made any sense to like try to introduce it and then explain the ways in which like Ellie would know she's immune, but like all of that. But then we do get them here. And I honestly think this is like totally fine. And I think that like, yeah, it's a full on like torture scene from Ellie. So I think there's already enough sort of like, we get it in this, like she's killing her, that we don't need some of these extra stuff that would have been a little confusing to layer in, I think.
Yeah. I don't think we're missing anything there. But she ends up going down into B2, and it's creepy as hell. We are seeing like the corpses, but still, I guess maybe a little bit alive and just being used, like their bodies being used. Who knows where consciousness comes into play, if they're still conscious at all. But these soldiers that were sealed in here being used by the cordyceps to breathe out the spores, and it's disgusting. It's disturbing. We see Leon, the son of the soldier we saw in the beginning of the episode, and then Ellie finds some power. She turns on some red light because it's got to set the mood.
I prefer the red light to the dark. I got the black dark. I gotta say. The difference here in the video game and the show, Taran, is the show is one shot, cut to black, or one like hitting Nora, black. The show is this like, or the video game, sorry, is this like, it stays on Ellie's face and she does it multiple times. And it's like essentially, I think, kind of like the same as like the cover art for the video. Like this is what we're is like, this is a thing. Do you find there to be like, I'm fine with how it plays out, I think, because we're getting what we're supposed to without it being like, again, I think this level of like, even if we're getting to a point where Ellie is torturing somebody, I think this show Ellie is not as hardened as video game Ellie is by this.
Well, I actually found the show to be like more disturbing.
Right. Well,
because
yeah.
I think we see a bit more of what's happening, whereas the game felt a little cartoonish, I would say, in terms of like Ellie's facial expression being like all contorted, and like the blood and the positioning of the camera quite certainly wouldn't have worked in live action format. I think it would have felt really strange.
Yeah.
But also like, it just didn't have, I think, the impact that this does, because in the game, Ellie's been moping around 24/7 and killing countless people and dogs, by the way. And so when she does this,
a lot of dogs in the game,
it's really not a surprise in any way. It's not something that feels much different than what I've when I'm playing the game and I get to this scene, I feel like I've done worse to like 15 people on the way here.
Yeah, that's right.
So it just doesn't have the same impact that this does, especially when they've set up this contrast that like they're talking about like who was the first person you killed, and because it's not that many people, and these kills have a significant impact on the psyche of these people, as it should. And so Ellie doing this is significant. And it's a significant reveal to us. It's a significant evolution of her character, and it is disturbing. And the way that she screams, "Where is she?" Is right back to it's like she is back in the moment when she was screaming, "I'm going to kill you all." That guttural, just everything scream. And so clearly this is a mirror of that scene, that Ellie is going to crouch down in the same way that Abby did. She's going to look and find a weapon in the same way that Abby did. She's even going to strike down at Nora's leg in the same way that Abby did to Joel. And so I just feel like this works so well. I think also that I was talking last episode about how, with all of the things that were happening, I was starting to feel like, do we really have to continue on this journey? But something that I think is done really well through this, and this is something that the game does also, that when Nora is talking about like, oh man, yeah, it was pretty brutal. It sucks that you had to watch that. I still see it in my dreams. You really deserved it, though. You're like, all right, that's it. No, all right, gloves off.
Yeah.
You're dead. I'm on board. Let's do it.
Yeah. I like the way this play. I mean, this is a lot of just like faithful stuff from the video game, but in terms of like knowing who it was, the call out of like, that he did it, saying that they should have killed, or like, we let you live, and she's like, maybe you should kill me. It's all like it's exactly my type of television, which is like, it's so dark and terrible and awful, and I just love it so much. So yeah. We're then going to get this flashback that presumably will be the focus of next episode, where Ellie wakes up and Joel walks in the door. So we're flashing back. Episode 6. I think this is a great time to do it in terms of like penultimate episode content. I think this is great. I think it's fun. I think we've had enough. I don't mean we've had enough as in like I'm sick of it. I just think we've I thought that was a good job to like focus in on Ellie, what Ellie's doing, to get to this specific point, and then inform us a little more, as likely they will next week. So I thought a very good ending to the episode. Actually, overall, a very good episode.
Yeah, again, like this was the big reveal, and like the structure of the season makes complete sense to me now. I think, especially when we talk spoilers, we can probably talk about exactly what's going to happen from this point. And I think it just all works. Again, like this entire journey has been in service of this development in Ellie's character, this moment where she is not going to be able to turn back, because this, again, does have impact. You can't just brutally beat somebody to death and walk away from it and be like, I'm a dad now. Like, it just doesn't work that way. And she was traumatized by what happened to Joel by watching it. It brought her here, and now she's further kind of re-traumatizing herself. They likened her to an addict in the podcast. This attraction she has to violence, and this again, like the whole season has been building to this moment, and so now we are going to kind of like again, they're so interested in this juxtaposition of the Ellie that was, the Ellie that could be, and the Ellie we have. And so we've kind of been getting a version of an Ellie that we kind of wish would probably exist, although maybe as an audience we're pretty bloodthirsty, and I think they kind of want Ellie to be a little more violent sometimes, but I think in general you want Ellie to be happy, and you are now flashing back to the Ellie that did exist, the version of her that was probably the happiest, where she was living with Joel, and everything seemed fine, and she was a little kid in a bed, and so that hard cut juxtaposition I thought was really effective, especially because you see Joel walk in, and again, I think you're getting the audience so on board with like what she's doing, because you're like, that's Joel. He was so great, and they did that to him. And there's this person saying he deserved it. Like, yeah, he did some messed up things, but like, come on.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, should be interesting to see next week. Anything else in this section, Taryn?
Let's move on. I think we got plenty to talk about with spoilers today.
Yeah, okay, let's do it. All right, we'll give some moments. People check out, just a reminder, Mike and I will be back on next Sunday night with an immediate recap episode of the penultimate episode. Tanner and I back with the deep dive where part one will be basically spoiler free. Yeah, shall we dive into it? Where do you want to begin, Taryn, in the spoiler section
I got a
of the
lot. I
pod?
got a lot
Let's
actually.
do it.
So first of all, I think we can probably just spell out the structure of where we're going. I think so. It seems like what we're getting next episode is just all of the flashbacks in a single episode. Um, I think there might be some people that are concerned about that because in the game, the flashbacks are spread throughout the entire game, with the culmination of the final one being at the end of the game. Um, I I feel like I say this a lot. I wasn't a fan of the flashbacks in the game, especially in game format, because they make you play through them, and they really dragged for me. And so because they weren't like fun to play, they're mostly just like, let me take a walk with Joel, and so their placement in the story, while some of it makes sense, I was pretty frustrated with them in general. Um, I think that there's potential here for a collection of flashbacks to work really well together, as a standalone kind of episode where they just go from one thing to another, flashing forward through time. And the whole thing with Eugene, I have to imagine the reason we focused in on Eugene so much is that Eugene will be the catalyst for Ellie discovering the truth. And that will be part of the climax for the episode. I know that they did it slightly differently in the game, but introducing Eugene here and setting it up beforehand, I think makes a lot of sense. And so I think this could be really, really good, especially getting to see Joel again and reminding us of everything we've lost, to continue to get us on board with the revenge plot, because that's something that I never was on board with in the game. I was just always like, all right, now we got to do this next thing. But the show has really gotten me invested in this revenge plot. And so we're gonna see all of this stuff from Joel, be reminded of what we've lost, and then heading into the final episode. I thought it was particularly interesting that they wanted, I couldn't say this in the non-spoiler part, but they wanted Jesse to remind Ellie of Joel, because I think that in the finale of this season, Abby's gonna kill him too, and it's gonna be again, like really,
Yeah.
really,
Yeah.
and that's gonna, I think, continue to reinvigorate this kind of frustration with Abby as a character, and that's what they wanted in the game, and I think that's what they will get in the show. And then, of course, we'll start season 2 with Abby day one in the way that you do in the game. So, does that sound
Yeah,
about right?
that sounds right to me. Well, I mean, I think they're being incredibly faithful to the game. I mean, the biggest difference here is like, yes, putting the flashbacks in more spread out as we're going along. Like, what do they go to a museum? What do they go? What are
Yep.
they? Yeah,
The
like that's
space
yeah, the
museum.
space museum. So like stuff like that I feel like is space out that I think like I think that the choice to like withhold us from Pedro Pascal more is actually when I'm like very happy they did, because I think it's more impactful. And I feel like if we just had Joel in basically every other episode since then, it does not be a big of a deal when we end the episode with going there. And we're basically pretty much lined up exactly right. I think the finale will have the moments you're talking about, but also we'll get, I think there's a is there a couple that there's two more WLF, like more of Abby's crew, that I think Ellie will dispatch of. If this feels like all pretty timed pretty well to like end basically at the time where we'll like switch right over to Abby predominantly.
And
So
I think it will work, At least better, because like I think one of the frustrations that some people had playing the game was that you spend these 3 days as Ellie leading up to this climactic moment. Abby kills Jesse, and then it's like, all right, you might be wondering how I got here. And then you immediately rewind and you start playing as Abby from the start, and it's just like, oh god, I have to go through 3 whole days. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's such whiplash. It's such structural whiplash.
Yeah.
And I think they want you to have whiplash, but not from the structure itself as much as the we talked about like challenging with empathy. And obviously the game is all about can you empathize with people that you consider to be monsters. And what I think is interesting about the show so far is that they are doing the opposite first, and then they're going to turn back around, which is Ellie's whole journey. And so I think that stopping it at a cliffhanger ending in season 2, and then starting with Abby's journey in season 3 a couple of years later, real time. I think that will work better because you won't have as much whiplash. And so that actually tracks to me more. I think it's still quite the challenge to have like a season of television without your stars, with entirely new characters. But I think that you can probably run through Abby's content in a few episodes, get back to the climax that you thought was maybe going to be at the end of the season, but turns out is probably more in the middle of the season. And unless they have a season 4, in which case it would be the whole season. And then, sort of move forward from there. So those are, I think, my structural thoughts.
The other thing I think that works about the Eugene tying into the way that Ellie finds out storyline is in the video game. She traveled all the way to Salt Lake City. I do think like as much as like I think that showing that they're willing to spend money on the show, I also think it makes a lot of sense to just sort of like reutilize a lot of like Jackson and like outside of Jackson stuff, where you have like maybe some patrol stuff and Eugene being a former Firefly who can like have information and like realize it's Joel, and Ellie can be looped into that. I think like I feel bad calling it like a cost savings, but I actually do think it, not that it might be that expensive to do, but I think like sending out like even in a flat, even like how much it would be worth it to like have Ellie go off to Salt Lake City even for a small amount of time. I think that this just to me I think logically makes more sense in terms of like what it's like making a television show.
Also, like in the game, she like finds out via like a recording, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
It makes sense in the context of
It's
the game
so
and how
video gamey.
information is introduced in the game. But like,
Yeah.
for that to be how it happens in the show would be pretty lame. And so creating a character and or not creating, but altering a character and then creating a scenario that is, I think, a bit more interesting for her for that to happen, and for there to be serious consequences for it as well. I think is definitely a decision I can get behind.
They've created Gale as a way that I imagine Gale's the next episode, which it does feel like, for as much as like it's Catherine Hahn, I know it's a supporting role. It does feel like she hasn't probably been in the show enough where like, as opposed to someone like Isaac, who will be in more of the show, it feels like this, we can get one more kind of like bigger ish Catherine O'Hara episode, I think next week too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What else you got?
So yeah, I wanted to talk about Dena some more, especially the sort of like story she tells and the speech she gives to Ellie. I thought this was interesting. I think that obviously, again, there's some level of, I think, like criticism for the concept of like Dena being more invested in the revenge than Ellie, but that's not how I saw this at all personally. Again, I think that is potentially missing some of the text stuff happening, where this is not Ellie saying I don't want to do it. It's more so I want to sort of like tuck you away somewhere. But beyond that, I think that it is a change in Dena's character, because in Dena's character in the game is a lot more, I would say one note in terms of like she is just a constant reminder of kind of like you should stop, like we should stop,
Yeah.
you should stop, and she, that's just kind of like all she is. She kind of just like serves a purpose in the narrative, and doesn't get to exist as much as a fully fleshed out character. And I think that the show has done a much better job of fleshing her out in that way. um, Dena has essentially become a follower of the Joel philosophy, and we talked about that already. Like she is like, let's do this. Like this is how we express love. Let's get revenge. Let's commit acts of violence. That is how I operate. And to me, this gives Dena a chance to change into the version, or at least a closer version of Dena that we see in the game, where like she has now been shot in the leg by an arrow. She is pregnant. And maybe with the birth of her child, this all kind of culminates in this situation where she is now moving in an opposite direction that Ellie is. Dena is now moving toward this idea of love being, something protective, yes, but something less violent, perhaps. A love that is like, well, actually, maybe I was wrong. Maybe pursuing revenge at all costs is not right when it comes at the expense of other people, other things that you love. And uh, Dena moving in that direction at the same time that Ellie is moving in the direction of, I just tortured somebody to get information. And then Abby showed up, and of course we're about to see what happens to Jesse and how that might impact Dena as well. And this being like a splitting point for the two of them, I think makes a lot of sense. And so for Dena, like this is like a different way of approaching love. That there's a price that is too high for revenge, and I think this change not only like reveals more layers of her as a character, but it also, I think, can serve as a blueprint for Ellie to follow by the end of the story. It's kind of like a counterpoint to the lessons that Joel taught her, and I think having a starting point being a follower of the Joel philosophy and then morphing into something that becomes more similar to the Dena in the game philosophy, I think is more effective, because it's exactly where Ellie travels throughout her time in the story.
For me, the thing I think that I like is this idea of Ellie learned how to be responsible or to care for somebody from Joel. That is the person who like most took care of her, and I feel like the way that she starts to approach her relationship with Dena, especially once there is this, the child piece of it is put in, is very similar to what I think. I think how Joel cares and loves for somebody. Joel is the one who's like sort of wants to take on the burden, wants to take on the responsibility, and I feel like that's the Joel we get, and that's basically I think what Ellie does when she decides not to go back to the theater, to instead go back. It's not that she doesn't think like Dena could, but she's not willing to risk that thing happening to Dena for Dena to join her. And so she decides to do it alone, which I think really is similar to the way we saw Joel, especially that version of Joel. I mean, there was a version of Joel that didn't want to care for any, like they're at different places, I think, in terms of actually, I think it is more of the like, once he had let Ellie into, you know, he had let her in versus where they were, because the very beginning he wouldn't take care of anybody. Like he didn't, he was just like closed off to everybody. But now that once he lets Ellie in, he doesn't want to risk losing Ellie. And I feel like that's the same place kind of that Ellie is in now, where she wants to get revenge for things she's doing, but she also doesn't want Dena to like get caught up in it, and Ellie's going to sort of like take it on herself. And you can argue like she shouldn't do it at all. Like it's a pointless thing she's going to do, really, ultimately. So I just think yeah, it's really interesting where they've how they've set the pieces, and I think in a way that, again, that's working because they understand the themes of the show.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a physical protection. It's a psychological protection.
Right.
It's the same way that Joel lied to Ellie about what happened in the hospital, thinking I'm going to take this on. I
Right.
did a bad thing,
Right.
and that's on me, and I'm gonna protect you from that.
Right.
I think Ellie feels the same way. She not only wants to physically protect Dena, but she is also protecting Dena from the darkness that she is holding in.
Right.
That's part of her being chipper, is that she is not exposing Dena to that darkness in the same way that Joel tried to protect her from what he did. Um, and you see this sense of protectiveness coming out even more so now that she knows that Dena is pregnant. Those words, "I'm gonna be a dad," are, I think, so much more meaningful than they might have first appeared, because that was Joel's entire identity. At least his entire identity is formed off of the fact that he's a dad. And as she grows into that role, she becomes more and more like Joel in so many ways, and again goes down that Joel path. And so it does, I think, all make sense. And so this is again part of why I just get so frustrated with the gut shot reaction of why isn't Ellie more sad or mad? And like, it's just like, what can you express to me what value that brings? Like, because I don't feel like, other than the fact that it's different, you're not really giving me much to work with when you have that complaint. And so it's frustrating to see. Especially because I do feel like this. I feel like there are so many reasons why it does work, beyond just like giving her space, to have that juxtaposition when she finally does break, to giving it more impact and weight when she kills somebody. Where it also feels more realistic. Like, yeah, back in the days of like episodic television, every episode was a reset, and so a reaction to that is like, oh, well, in this show, they're gonna still be sad about something that happened last week. It's like, well, we don't have to go that far. Like, people respond in different ways, and there's a level of realism to somebody who is holding it in, pretending to be okay, while on the inside they're feeling an intense grief. Like, that is something that is very natural. And it's, there's often like an expectation that they do that, sometimes a desire that they do that, because it's easier for other people to handle. It's not comfortable if somebody's being a mopey all the time, and so your instinct is to just put up this mask. And for Ellie, the mask comes right off when she's alone, and I think that's, again, just super interesting.
One thing another thing I find really interesting about this show is, and I feel like it came up a lot when we were talking about like playing as Abby and some of the things in the way that the show worked. And I was feeling it from about the way that people were, like, the video game players were so there's so much vitriol against Abby. And I felt like part of that, I don't know whether this would ever, if it could even be studied, but this idea that there was more of a, like, when you play as a video game character, do you as a person feel like you have, and I'm talking about the general you, have more of a uh, uh, license to then be mad at what the character is doing? Like, is there a thing where when there's a character who is like the villain of the thing, and part of this is to like build empathy for Abby, but like weirdly, did people have the opposite reaction because they felt ownership over a character that they were moving around in the video game? And I think about this from, and now I was thinking about this from the way that people are upset with Ellie's reaction to Joel dying, and how she doesn't move with like sadness or anger, or like what would like more commonly look like grief. Because in a video game, like, yes, like you get moments of her doing it, but the whole time you're playing, like, if you have grief about the fact that Joel died, you're playing the character. Do you know what I mean? Like you. So then I think people are upset that like the character on the show where there's a little more of a like to some degree when you play a video game, part of the fun of it is that like you are that person, and that's a different experience than what it's like watching a television show where you might like relate to a character and you love a character, you empathize with the character, or sympathize with the character, or get frustrated with the character, but you are not that character. And I think it's like really interesting. I think I would love to find some like psychological stuff about like this difference of like when you play as a character that you move and control all of the things that they do, other than when you go into a cutscene. Like, what type of psychological connection do you have with a character? And then the other thing is that I also think like I can feel you like you're like, oh, you're annoyed. And I am too. So I don't want to like put this all on you. Of like people who I think are like misunderstanding grief because like I think people have a very simplistic view of grief, to the point where like we talk about the 5 stages of grief a lot. Those are like kind of been debunked as a thing that like grief doesn't really happen in the way that like that book basically like came out in 1969 with almost no like real scientific backing to like to how grief actually functions and works. So people are like, I want them to be mad. And it's like, so they're still in this phase of grief, and it's like that's not really how grief works at all. So I just think like all of this is like very interesting in terms of television.
Yeah, and I think last week I talked about my frustration with the criticism, this specific criticism, because it felt so empty. It felt like what is where is the substance to this? And I was like, because I want to like discuss it, but it just doesn't feel like anywhere I'm seeing a significant amount of substance. And there is some, like I said, I think I addressed some of it last week. There's reason to like the way that they did it in the game. There's reason to like the mopier Ellie, and I think the best argument I've seen for that is that like it makes you more uncomfortable and it challenges you more because it's harder to like Ellie and all of these things. And I think that's fair. It didn't work for me in the game. It is working for me in the show. But that to some degree is fair. But I think that what I've come to see a little bit more over the last week and in the response to this episode as well is that like I found myself while watching the episode thinking about how chipper Ellie is. And it's not something I ever would have really even thought that much about. I would have just immediately jumped to, of course, because she's hiding, she's masking. But throughout the episode, I was now thinking about like it had infected my mind. Like, oh, is she properly oh, we got that hint when she stopped playing the song. Whew, thank God. Hopefully people will like that. Oh, at the end of the episode, like, oh yes, finally. I was thinking, finally, she's exposing her rage. Instead of like, I think the response I would have preferred to have, which was like, that's scary. And I think that it all stems from this idea that I have now been thinking about this in a way that I didn't really want to. And I was thinking about the criticism and where it comes from. And, I think that it shouldn't be lost on anyone that the game was met with a lot of controversy. That in particular, Abby, the voice actor that played Abby, and just the character in general, received an immense amount of hate. And a lot of that came from a very bad place. And this is very well recognized. There's an entire subreddit built up to hating the game, hating that character, hating the actor that played that character. And there was a bit of a schism in like the fan base where like a lot of the people that hated it went there and a lot of people that liked the game went somewhere else. And right now, both of those places seem kind of in concert, in sort of wishing that Ellie was a little more grumpy. And it doesn't, I think, surprise me that the people that took issue with Abby as a character, because she, in their minds, might have represented some kind of like, trans identity, even though she didn't in the game, and the way that she was represented in the thing that she did, and the thing, ultimately this game has a lot of LGBTQ themes and characters in it. And so finding ways to hate that has become very popular, I think, in media criticism lately. And so it is not surprising to me that those people have found a new thing to latch onto, which is Bella Ramsey and the way in which they are playing Ellie. And it also does not surprise me that that they feel more comfortable with Ellie and Ellie being in a lesbian relationship when she's being miserable the whole time, rather than expressing joy through that relationship. And these are the kinds of people that would be like, oh, I can't dislike anything without being accused of whatever, right? But those people, I think, are signal boosting this particular criticism to an immense degree. And I think it's a legitimate criticism that other people are picking up on. But I think that it has broadened so deeply into the world of discussion around this show that even people like me who don't have the criticism and disagree with the criticism are now focused on it and thinking about it in the show. And I think it's important to note like where some of these things come from, because while I don't think that it's like necessarily intentional, I do think that biases often come into play, especially around media criticism focused on these shows. We talk about the Wheel of Time and how one of the main criticisms of the Wheel of Time show is, hey, my straight white guy isn't getting enough cool power moments that they're giving to all the women. Like, again, I don't think that like there's a bunch of like there's like a cabal of bigots who are coming up with disingenuous criticism. I think that biases exist. They inform how you watch things. They inform how you might critique things, and that's worth talking about. And unfortunately, in talking about that, there are some people that like to plug their ears and contact their lawyer and write up the defense case for themselves for why they're not feeling that way or whatever the case may be. But these things exist in all of us, and talking about it, I think, is important. So just to be clear, I'm not saying that if you have any of these criticisms, or if you have criticisms at all, it means that you feel these things, you think these things, or anything like that. I had lots of problems myself with the game, and they had nothing to do with Abby's character or anything like that. But I do think it's something that I was seeing in particular, especially recently, especially revolving around Bella Ramsey, the way that they're playing the character, the way that people are criticizing Bella's face and her facial acting.
Yeah, it's kind of gross.
Or their facial acting, I'm looking at comparison screenshots to Bella versus the game, and it's just like, where was this energy for Pedro, who made the same creative decision when he was shooting up a hospital that I loved? Because a blank face while shooting people up is terrifying. And it makes a ton of sense for Bella to have the same facial reactions, the same facial expressions that Pedro did in these moments. And it's just like, again, they're looking for and of course, they're massive fans of Dena's actor.
Yes.
Because many reasons. But I just wanted to sort of get that all off of my chest, because it's been frustrating.
Yeah, and I think what you're in terms of like when you're talking about like if people have criticisms of the show or Bella's performance or whatever, like it's fair enough to have that. It is fair to ask that, hope that people do that in a way that is like a respectful criticism of those things. And it is also fair, I think, sometimes to ask them, especially when I think other people I feel like Bella Ramsey got a lot of acclaim for the season 1 performance, and it is now this season 2 performance that maybe isn't working as well for people. I do think it's fair to ask, and again, like people can have legit criticisms, and I like it, and also like to say, maybe like have some introspective thought about why maybe like one particular performance is not working over other performances in the show as well. I think
I think a lot of that personally stems from the way that they've written Ellie as a character. Where like because Ellie as a character is not performing in her grief in the same way that you expect her to. You're essentially placing the blame of that onto Bella rather than the writers. And some people are, I think, blaming the writers. I don't blame either because I like the direction, but I think that that's where a lot of that stems from as well. But again, it all gets mixed up and intermingled with this other stuff. And what I think is important is not to say you are a bigot if you think this way, or these are bigoted criticisms, but to say if you have these criticisms, it's worth looking at who you're discussing them with, who you're like, where they're coming from. It's worth just like acknowledging that some of these things exist. In the same way that I think my criticisms and the things that I like to examine in that way as well. I think that this sort of thing should be talked about more. I think that there is a reaction to it that is like, shut that down. We are not supposed to talk about that because that is victimizing me by saying that I am thinking a certain way, by having a certain thought about a show. But all of this comes into play. Like this, we're all humans. We all have biases. We all think about things in certain ways. I have plenty of biases when I watch a show, and acknowledging those for my own criticism is super meaningful to me. That's all I'm trying to get at. And it was, I think, particularly frustrating for me because I had allowed a lot of those criticisms to color the way that I'm watching the show without even sort of like trying to examine where those are coming from in the first place. And so it was helpful for me to sort of examine this, and maybe it's hopefully helpful to a couple of people listening. Yep. And I'm sure there'll be other people who are angry at me in the comments, but that's fine.
Yeah, but I feel similar. Like I do it where like I definitely try to like figure out where I'm coming from with something, and sometimes I say something and I'm like, then afterwards will be like, oh, that's actually coming from a thing that like I clearly have a bias about. Like I had a lot of it with like Industry, which is another HBO show, where I think maybe like sometimes maybe I was a little critical of certain characters over others, and like people in the comments would be like, I think it's like a bias. And I was like, okay, interesting. Like let me explore if I think that that's true or not. So maybe if it sounds like we're on a soapbox, like I think it's like we get a lot of feedback about like our opinions on things, and sometimes it involves us. The other piece, I'm seeing a lot of stuff about like Bella's line read of like, I'm going to be a dad. And I think one thing that's important to note about this show is like, yes, Ellie is, for all we know, like a cis woman, and like, a sort of a butch, sort of like not even butch really, but like, more masculine presenting lesbian in the show or in the video game. I think there's like, it's interesting that like, despite Bella Ramsey being non-binary, I think like sometimes there are different choices I think being made about like gender presentation, but Bella Ramsey didn't come out as non-binary until I believe in the middle of 2023, which was like after the show started. I think it was like right around the season 1 was airing, maybe like it was in the middle of it. The Bella Ramsey came out. And so yeah, April of 2020. Oh no, that's when it was last edited. Anyway, all that to say is I wouldn't be surprised if like the like I'm gonna be a dad line is like sort of like an acknowledgement of like Bella's playing Ellie with some sort of like gender, like androgynous sort of like thing. I think that line is like, and in fact, like it's interesting because if it was not I think that line is actually more well received if it's not a non-binary. Like if it's like a woman saying the line of like, I'm gonna be a dad, I think it comes off more like jokey and like,
well, I mean, think about it. Ellie has never known her mother. She's only ever known a father figure. The idea of being a parent is synonymous with being a dad, I think, in her mind. That alone, I think, is an explanation for the line on top of, all of the other reasons why she might say that.
Yeah. So all of to say, I'm in very much agreement with you about, the shows for, and the like very weird, I think, sort of like an interesting conversation that's happening around the show that I in particular do not love. And I think part of what we're probably butting up against is like, like we had this with The Acolyte, where it was like, that show was like we had problems with the show, and there was like this sort of like public, and that was like an interesting thing to parse. This is like, oh, I am quite enjoying it, and it's really interesting that like people seem to not be. But again, I think it's just like this vocal group of people we're seeing. I think that like generally day to day, like when I'm chatting with people about The Last of Us, people are generally enjoying it. I think the other thing that's interesting to me is that like these do not seem to be the same criticisms about the game that suddenly everybody is a defender of The Last of Us.
That's
The
what I'm
Last of Us
saying.
Part Two.
The subreddit dedicated to hating the game is now talking about why the game is so much better than the show. And it's again, it's just like we have talked about this, especially on the Tastemakers, about like I have run into this personally. That you run into criticisms for shows like The Acolyte, like other shows that have somehow stepped their foot into the culture war that exists in particularly America these days, but certainly around the world as well. And the issue that I sometimes personally have is that I don't always know that. I don't always recognize that this is a culture war thing more than it is a media criticism thing. And because of that, it can get really confusing and difficult to parse out what is real and what is like a read on a show and what is an argument in the war on wokeness or whatever, right? And so this, I think, to me was just like, oh wow, I didn't, because I don't go to the hate subreddit for The Last of Us 2 very often. But when I did, I was like, oh, this is where this is being signal boosted. Like, this is okay. I'm starting to get now why I was confused about some of this criticism. And if you are somebody that has the criticism or has other kinds of criticism, this isn't me calling you out. This is me just offering like, hey, just so you know, because I was curious myself. I think that there are a lot of people that have this particular view on it. And that's valuable, I think, hopefully valuable for you. Not that you need to stop having the criticism in the same way that I didn't stop criticizing The Acolyte, but like just to know that exists so that you have a better understanding of where this is all potentially coming from. And you might read it differently too, and that's also fine. Anyway, I apologize.
No, it's great. I think it's interesting. I love it. I feel like we're like worried that like I tend to think this probably isn't our audience, and if it is people in our audience who do think that,
Yeah.
I think probably you're not actually even who we're talking about. And actually, like if you are, I think that last part that we're talking about like maybe think about why you might not be vibing with the depiction of this character. It could just be legitimately, fair criticism, but also maybe not, because
Absolutely.
and I say that knowing that like I think that like I have been responsible for that as well, of like having like a biased opinion about a thing I'm watching and not really like knowing where that comes from. So yeah, yeah,
I deal with this on Big Brother a lot, where like when discussing these kinds of things, people, their defenses just shoot up.
yeah,
But like a thing that I try to do on Big Brother and with other shows too is that like I think these kinds of conversations should be normalized more. That the more we talk about them, the more we realize they're not as scary as you might think they are. It's okay if you or somebody else or whatever might have had biases, might have informed some things. Like,
mm,
these things do exist, and the more we talk about them, the better. And it doesn't mean that we have to be like witch hunting or anything like that. It just means that we're just acknowledging and analyzing in the same way that we're acknowledging and analyzing things that don't have anything to do with it from the show.
yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Anything else about this episode in this section of the pod?
I think that's mostly. I guess the final piece of it is that like another reason why I think that the Chipper Ellie works better for me in the show versus how they did it in the game is that I feel so much more invested in Ellie as a character and her journey. And because of that, they have continued to like give me that ride that I think some people did experience in the game, that but I didn't, where like I am back and forth on, I do want revenge for Joel, but I don't want it to destroy Ellie, but I do want Nora to die because man, that was annoying. But not at the expense of the relationship of Ellie and Dena. And like, not at the cost of Jesse's life, and like all of these things. I think I guess what's interesting to me is that for many people, especially those that listen to the podcast, I think the game worked really well for them, and they had this experience playing the game that they really appreciate because it was kind of unique. I did not have that experience with the game. I think it was an ambitious, really cool thing, but it didn't work for me in the way that the people that made it wanted it to. And so right now, I feel like I'm experiencing the thing that the game tried to do for the first time, and
Right.
in a way that it's actually working. And a huge part of that, I think, has been Ellie not being such a downer all the time.
To me, I think that it's, I say this all the time, and I've said this about adaptation stuff, and I think especially one where you have somebody who made the video game now working on the show is like, what are we going to do instead? Not just because it's a different medium, but maybe because they want to, they maybe they feel like it wasn't always as effective as it could have been, and like how you get an opportunity to do it differently. So I think I don't, to me, it's kind of interesting to think about like why they might have done that, which is like, they're very clearly like sticking to the way that they did it with like just like these shifts in certain things. This is not like so different than the video game. But different enough, I think, that you feel like they feel like maybe he's like, well, I almost had it, but if with these small tweaks, this is how we can like get across this message effectively, and it'll be more effective in this version than in a video game version. So I'm with you. I really like this episode. I like chatting it through. I'm finding this that I'm like, I grow an appreciation for the episode after we chat about it, because I find that there is so much to dig into here that I think that they're nailing. So yeah.
Mhm. Cool.
All right. Well, that is our deep dive for this week. We'll be back next week. In the meantime, Taran, what else we got going on?
Check us out on the Tastemakers.
Yeah.
We're about to record that one as well. I've been doing a new thing on YouTube. I've been doing some like watch along reaction videos to the Genius UK that people seem to really enjoy. So you can check out my YouTube channel if you want to watch that.
Very fun. All right. Yeah, we're also doing Andor wrap ups. Andor will wrap up this week as
Andor.
well. So the final episodes of that, and there'll be more coverage of things here on We Know Scripted TV. So we'll see you all next time for another deep dive. Until then, bye bye.